The conference room in Geneva shimmered under artificial chandeliers, a stage set for power. World leaders sat in curated rows, posture stiff with self-importance. At the head of the table, of course, was Donald J. Trump, arms folded, eyes burning with smug certainty. To his right, flanked by advisors and media personnel, sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calm as a mountain before a storm. Trump leaned forward with a theatrical sigh. "You begged for help, remember that," he said, his voice loud enough to draw the cameras. "You came crawling. Without us, there wouldn't even be a Burkina Faso." The room tensed. A few smirks rippled from the Western Bloc, but Traoré didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "No," he said quietly, "we kicked you out, and we're still standing." The silence was volcanic. Cameras zoomed in. The translator froze mid-breath. Macron shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even the UN delegate from Germany blinked twice. Trump raised an eyebrow. "Still standing? Without US aid? Without our weapons, our money, our mercy?" Traoré's eyes locked on Trump's. "You don't give mercy," he said. "You sell chains. And then call them aid packages." Flashbulbs exploded like gunfire. Journalists scrambled for audio. "You want a history lesson?" Traoré continued. "Burkina Faso didn't fall when you pulled out. We rose. We bled, we fought, and we stood. Without a single drone strike to save us. Without your democracy theater. Without your IMF shackles." The U.S. delegation whispered nervously. One aide tapped furiously on a tablet. Trump leaned back, lips tightening. "You begged," Trump repeated, this time quieter, as if to himself. "No," Traoré said. "We warned." That one word, warned, hung in the air like the scent of something burning. And Trump, for the first time that day, didn't respond. This wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. Traoré wasn't there to be lectured. He was there to end the illusion that Africa owed anyone anything. The tension after Traoré's words hadn't settled, it had metastasized. It crept into every corner of the summit hall like smoke after an explosion. Journalists whispered into earpieces. Delegates pretended to check notes, but their eyes never left Traoré. Trump, visibly irritated, adjusted his cufflinks. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning forward again. "You think kicking us out was strength? You think isolation makes you mighty?" Traoré didn't blink. "You think occupation makes you a savior?" That landed hard. Trump scoffed. "You're living in a fantasy. Africa needs America. The whole world knows it." Traoré smiled, but it wasn't friendly, it was a blade. "The world knows many things. They just forgot to say them out loud." The room fell still again. "You came to our lands," Traoré continued, "not with open hands, but with contracts. You dug our earth, not to share, but to steal. You built embassies next to your airstrips, not for peace, but for control." Trump laughed, a hollow sound echoing across the hall. "We came because you couldn't manage yourselves. You came because we finally did," Traoré shot back. "And you panicked." It was a moment few expected. The man once dismissed as a military upstart was now disarming empires with sentences. The world wasn't just watching, it was re-evaluating. "You pretend you helped us," Traoré continued, standing slowly. "But every deal came with a leash. Every speech came with a threat. Every handshake held a dagger." He scanned the room. "To everyone here pretending to represent freedom while guarding monopolies, hear me well. Africa is not your unfinished project. We are not broken dolls in need of American glue." Then he turned back to Trump. "And we don't kneel. Not for you. Not for your money. Not for your missiles." Trump clenched his jaw. "You're lucky to sit at this table," he hissed. Traoré's eyes flared with fire. "I didn't come to sit. I came to flip it." The world held its breath. And for a brief second, it felt like the age of submission had finally met its funeral. There was no applause. No ceremonial nods. Just silence. Not the respectful kind, but the kind that follows an earthquake when everyone wonders if the second wave is coming. And it did, because Traoré wasn't finished. Trump leaned back, trying to reclaim his composure, but the damage was visible. His face stiffened. His lips curled downward, not in thought, but in frustration. He raised a hand and snapped, "The very technology you're using, the infrastructure you walk on, even your suit, it all came from us. From the West." Traoré didn't flinch. He stepped forward, voice steady, words like iron. "Then let me correct the myth. You didn't build the world. You took it. You didn't create Africa's wealth. You extracted it. You didn't uplift our nations. You buried them, beneath your greed, your corporations, your bombs." Trump's expression cracked into a smirk, trying to mask the sting. "You're welcome," he sneered. That's when Traoré's voice turned cold. "No," he said, pacing slowly now, the rhythm of his words haunting. "You're the guest who burned the house and claimed ownership of the ashes." Somewhere in the back, a diplomat dropped their pen. No one moved to pick it up. "You sold our diamonds to fund your wars. You drilled our oil, then left us to drown in pollution. You taught our children your language, and erased our history. And now, you sit here," he said, gesturing across the table, pretending to offer guidance, "when all you've ever delivered was chains in gift wrap." Trump narrowed his eyes. "Watch your tone." Traoré stopped, locking eyes with him. "Why? Does truth sound louder when spoken by a free African?" Boom. The room was shifting. Not physically, but politically. The center of gravity was moving. "And to all of you watching," Traoré turned toward the cameras now, "understand this. Africa remembers. We are not rising because of your help. We are rising in spite of it." He paused, then added with brutal clarity, "We were never beneath you. You just stood on our backs and called it elevation." Even the translation earpieces couldn't dilute the force of that sentence. It echoed beyond the summit, through phones, broadcasts, and headlines. Something had changed, and it wasn't just rhetoric. It was posture. Traoré stood tall, not in defiance, but in truth. Trump looked away, but the cameras didn't. And the world? The world leaned in. Trump leaned forward, his knuckles widening as they pressed against the oak of the summit table. His voice dropped into something meant to intimidate, low, slow, deliberate. "You think standing here makes you powerful? You think your little movement can stop the engine of the West?" Traoré didn't blink. Trump continued, "Your nations begged for food. You begged for medicine. You begged for dollars. And we gave them, because we are merciful." The room tensed, but Traoré smiled. "Mercy," he repeated. "Is that what you call it?" He stepped closer. No podium now. No formal stage. Just two men, one clinging to a fading empire, the other pulling the curtain down on it. "Let me tell you what your mercy looked like," Traoré said, voice rising like the tide. "It looked like sacks of grain dropped from planes with your flag stamped over them, while your companies were looting our soil. It looked like expired vaccines, surveillance deals, and puppet governments propped up with your handshakes and our blood." Trump scoffed. "Conspiracy." Traoré raised a finger. "History." The room went still again. "You didn't feed us," Traoré said, his voice cutting deeper now. "You fed yourselves through us. Your supply chains, your luxury, your stock markets, built on our cocoa, our lithium, our stolen futures. You colonized the body, then came for the soul." A hush. Trump shifted uncomfortably. Traoré's words became sharper. "Now you say we begged? No. We were bleeding. And you bottled our suffering, branded it as charity, and sold it back to us." There were murmurs now. In the audience. In the press room. Across social feeds. This wasn't a speech anymore. It was a reckoning. "And now," Traoré said, "your empire starves. You need our gold, our rare earth minerals, our markets. But Africa is not your farm. We are not your pantry. We are not your waiting room for greatness." Trump opened his mouth, but no sound followed. Traoré turned to the cameras again. "You talk about leadership. But the world sees the truth. The one who demands obedience fears freedom. And you, Mr. Trump, you fear me." The line didn't shout. It sliced. And for the first time, Trump didn't respond. He just sat there, while Traoré walked past him, head high, voice low. "Begging is not what we did. Surviving is what we mastered. By the time the summit reached its midpoint, the dynamic had shifted. What started as a confrontation now felt like a collapse, of old power, of imperial memory, of the illusion that Africa still waited for permission. Trump, still sitting rigid, gestured to one of his aides, who quickly handed him a document, thick, red-stamped, classified. He held it up like a trophy. "These are the sanctions," Trump said smugly. "Economic, strategic, military deterrence. If you continue to defy our leadership, we'll tighten every screw. We'll isolate you until your people beg to return to the table." The threat hung in the air. Until Traoré reached forward, and tore the document from Trump's hand. He held it up, then dropped it to the floor with theatrical calm. "Your sanctions," Traoré said, "were never ropes strong enough to hold us. They were rusted chains, leftovers from a dying world." A wave of camera flashes exploded. "You weaponized hunger. You tried to kneel us with trade embargoes, asset freezes, dollar domination. But every chain you threw at us became molten steel in our hands." He raised his voice now. "And with that steel, we forged swords." There was a pause. Long, heavy. Traoré walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, locking eyes with foreign dignitaries seated in velvet rows. "When you sanctioned Zimbabwe, the soil responded with resistance. When you threatened Mali, its people marched. When you sanctioned Burkina Faso, we built dams, not excuses. Farms, not fears. Coalitions, not colonies." He turned back toward Trump. "Each sanction taught us to stand. Every blockade showed us our own strength. You didn't break us. You built us." Trump tried to interrupt, "That's not how economics works." But Traoré cut in. "No. That's not how your economics works. But Africa's logic is different now. We don't measure value by how close we are to your table, we measure it by how far we've walked away from it." A few gasps from the American press corps. One journalist even stood to record from a closer angle. "And tell me, Mr. Trump," Traoré said, slowly walking back to center. "If your sanctions work, why is your economy still addicted to our gold? Our cobalt? Our clean energy metals?" Trump's jaw clenched, hands balled into fists. Traoré stepped forward one last time. "Threaten us with chains again, and you'll meet the blades we've forged in your fire." Silence. The world wasn't watching anymore. The world was listening. The silence in the room was no longer discomfort, it was a reckoning. Trump sat frozen, his typical bombast deflated. But Traoré wasn't done. He stepped to the microphone again, but this time his tone softened, not weaker, but colder, sharper. Like the tip of a blade before it meets flesh. "You taught the world to measure value in dollars," he said, scanning the faces of diplomats, CEOs, bankers, generals. "And then you weaponized that value. You made your currency a leash, your banking system a whip, your institutions a cage." Traoré lifted a small object from his pocket, a single, gold coin, gleaming beneath the lights. Its face bore the map of Africa, and a lion roaring into the wind. "This is the new currency," he said. "Not just gold. Not just minerals. But the power of sovereignty. The currency of fearlessness." He tossed the coin into the air, letting it arc, then caught it without looking. "Africa is no longer on the auction block. We are not for sale. We are not your development project. And we are not your economic punching bag." Trump's voice cracked from behind his podium. "We built your markets." "No," Traoré snapped. "You stole our wealth. You flooded our lands with IMF loans, then demanded blood in repayment. You devalued our labor, then taxed our breath. You destabilized our governments, then blamed us for the collapse." He stepped down from the platform, walking directly toward Trump. "Every dollar you printed, you backed with our silence. Every sanction you passed, you wrapped in lies about freedom. You wanted us poor so we'd stay obedient. But now. He opened his arms wide. We have no debt to you. We owe you nothing. There was movement in the room. UN ambassadors whispering. African diplomats nodding. The Saudi and Chinese delegations exchanged glances. Even a few American press reporters looked uneasy. Traoré turned to the cameras. You say we're not in your league, he said, echoing Trump's earlier insult. You're right. A pause. Because we refuse to join a league built on theft, war, and white flags of diplomacy dipped in blood. A ripple of applause, quiet at first, then growing louder. And then Traoré delivered the final strike. You made your economy with our resources. Now we'll build our future without yours. And in the new order. He held up the gold coin once more. We are the currency now. The coin hit the podium with a metallic ring. Trump didn't move. The room did. Trump leaned forward, fists clenched on the podium. His voice strained, not with anger, but with desperation. You think you're the future? You're standing on borrowed ground, with borrowed courage. Without us, you're nothing. Traoré tilted his head, studying Trump the way a lion studies a wounded hyena. There was no more need for performance. The world had already shifted. No, Traoré said calmly. You were the ones renting power. And the lease just expired. Gasps whispered through the chamber. Traoré stepped forward again, his voice deep, measured, carrying the rhythm of judgment. For centuries, your empire didn't grow, it consumed. You rented soldiers, rented allies, rented obedience with fake treaties and thinner promises. But every lease ends, and every landlord comes to collect. He gestured broadly to the crowd. Look around, Donald. The nations you once commanded now raise eyebrows, not flags. The puppets are cutting their strings. And your empire? A pause. It was a rental, built on borrowed lies and stolen bricks. Trump tried to interject, but his microphone had gone silent. Symbolic? Maybe. But the timing felt biblical. You mock Africa, Traoré continued, because you know what we are becoming. You see it in our unity, our resources, our youth, our fire. You remember what you buried, but we never forgot where you left the shovel. He walked the center aisle, passing silent diplomats frozen in the weight of his words. You call us unstable, he said. Yet it's your banks that collapse. Your cities that burn. Your people who riot. You call us lawless, yet it's your police who kneel on necks. Traoré paused before the American delegation. You call us backward. But while you were busy conquering, we were learning. While you were busy stealing, we were surviving. While you were busy laughing. He turned fully to Trump. We were remembering. Trump stood motionless. The smile that once held rallies in its grip now looked hollow. Traoré gave the final words of the night, not as a threat, but as a forecast. Your time of renting is over. We are reclaiming what you thought we'd forgotten. And if that terrifies you. He stepped closer. Good. Trump, flushed and fuming, finally found his voice. You stand there like you've won something, he spat. But don't forget, we own the game. We built the world economy. We feed your aid, your medicine, your tech. You're here because we let you be. Traoré didn't blink. You feed us, he repeated slowly, voice quiet but razor sharp. You mean like a farmer feeds a pig before slaughter? The room froze. He took another step forward. You didn't build the world economy. You looted it. You didn't create peace. You sold weapons wrapped in treaties. You didn't invent prosperity. You exported poverty and imported diamonds. A murmur rippled through the hall. Traoré wasn't just addressing Trump anymore. He was talking to every nation that had ever played servant while pretending it was partnership. You colonized the land, then colonized the banks. You poisoned our waters, then sold us bottled relief. You stripped our soil, then blamed us for the famine. You pulled the ladder up, and now you act surprised we're climbing without it. Trump narrowed his eyes. You're all talk. No, Traoré snapped, suddenly thunderous. I'm the voice you tried to silence. I'm the echo of every tribe you scattered, every brother you enslaved, every child you lied to in a textbook. I'm the consequence of centuries. He turned toward the assembly, scanning the stone-faced leaders. You built an empire on arrogance. But even empires rot when truth grows in the cracks. He looked back to Trump. And now you're here, clinging to a throne that never belonged to you, screaming into microphones that no one's listening to. You think this is your table? He asked, pacing toward the American flag. Then tell me, why are you sweating at it? Traoré stopped, eyes locked on Trump. You don't fear me because I'm wrong, he said. You fear me because I remember. Trump's lips parted, but no words came. You mock me like I'm beneath you, Traoré continued. But history has never bowed to a clown. And the future won't wait for a coward. With that, Traoré turned to leave the podium, but stopped. America taught the world how to exploit, he said over his shoulder. Now it's time you learn how to rebuild, with empty hands and humbled eyes. The silence that followed was thunderous. Even those who had come expecting drama, some hoping to see Traoré humiliated, were now sitting stiff-backed, their eyes fixed on the man who had just redefined the tone of the room. Even the translators struggled, their voices faltering as they attempted to carry the weight of Traoré's fury into cold, formal speech. Trump, for once, had nothing to say. A few allies, Kristi Noem, J.D. Vance, even a visibly agitated Ted Cruz, shifted in their seats, clearly debating whether to interject or retreat. But none dared to speak first. No one wanted to follow that. Traoré, now seated, looked utterly unbothered. His posture calm, eyes scanning the room not like a guest but like a sovereign surveying land long denied. The silence had become a battlefield, and he owned it. That's when an African delegate 2 rows back, from a nation Trump once called a hellhole, slowly stood up. With respect, he said, voice carrying. President Traoré does not speak alone. Another delegate rose. Then another. Rwanda. Ghana. Kenya. Chad. Even Tunisia. One by one, they stood, heads held high, silent but undeniable. It wasn't a protest, it was a coronation. The message was clear, Africa was no longer kneeling. Traoré nodded slightly, not as a man basking in praise, but as one acknowledging comrades in arms. Then, from the far side of the hall, a quiet voice rose. It belonged to a South American diplomat, one who had long been on the receiving end of Western democracy. You mock him, she said, eyes on Trump. But you're afraid because he doesn't owe you anything. Even some European delegates looked uneasy now. Whispers rose. Old guilt stirred. The empire wasn't just being challenged, it was being unmasked. Trump tried to smile, to recover the narrative. Let's be real, he muttered into the mic. He's just a populist with a speechwriter. Traoré leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. I don't need a speechwriter, he said coldly. The world wrote my speech. With blood. The room was still again. A hush settled over the assembly. Not one of awe, but of confrontation. Of realization. The old power dynamics were cracking, not behind closed doors or in quiet diplomacy, but here, now, under the hot lights of a world stage. Traoré had just drawn a line that even the boldest refused to cross. Trump leaned back, arms folded, wearing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd made a career out of mocking the weak, dominating debates, and crushing dissent with loudness. But for the first time, his voice seemed small. From the corner, an aide handed him a folder. He didn't open it. He didn't need more facts. He needed control. And he had none. Traoré stood again. Not for show. Not for applause. But because something had shifted, and he knew it. You call us unstable, he said, voice calm. But we have never colonized. Never bombed for profit. Never enslaved for gold. We endured your chaos. And still, you fear our dignity. Trump rolled his eyes, but the room didn't laugh with him this time. Traoré stepped forward, his presence heavier than any argument. You want Africa's voice silenced, he said, turning now not to Trump alone, but to the entire room, because if we speak, your lies unravel. If we rise, your grip fades. And if we lead, then your history answers to ours. A quiet murmur followed. A reckoning had arrived, not by vote or sanction, but by truth, raw, inconvenient, and unstoppable. The camera zoomed in. Millions were watching. Across Africa, in favelas, refugee camps, and capital cities, people leaned toward screens, seeing in Traoré something that had been denied for generations, a leader who did not bow, who did not ask, but who demanded the world listen. And in that moment, even his enemies saw it. Traoré didn't come to play politics. He came to bury an empire. And as he walked away from the mic, not looking back, it was clear. He just did.